For sure. And over to Newcastle, Paul. Obviously, the summer window didn't go the way Eddie Howe wanted, but they are still lining up some bids for it this coming year. Leroy Sané linked with a move back to the Premier League. Just 10 months remaining on his Bayern Munich contract. We know they've been looking for a right-sided winger. Would this be a good fit for Leroy Sané and Eddie Howe?
He's a good player, isn't he? Obviously, he's of an age now where I'm surprised that Bayern have let him go 10 months into his contract. When a player goes that deep without negotiations starting, you would expect pastures new. I think a player like Leroy Sané, with his reputation, with what he's done, where he's played, in all honesty, with no disrespect, I think he'll be looking for Champions League football if he is to move, and if he is to move on a free. He's going to want to play regularly in the Champions League to enhance his international prospects as well. So yeah, as much as Newcastle are the richest club in the world, and the financial package they'd be able to offer him would match the very best, but I think a player like Leroy Sané, with FFP and PSR at Newcastle, they can't just go throwing money about with wages, because let's not forget the wages all fall into the categories as well for PSR and FFP. It's not just transfer fees paid. So even if you do pick Leroy Sané up on a free, you're going to have to pay him a hell of a lump in wages, because wherever else he goes, he's going to get that lump in wages as well. But I just think potentially, listen, they're up there at the moment, they're there and thereabouts, but I just think the potential that if they don't get Champions League, I don't think this is a conversation. If they do get Champions League, then yeah, they're absolutely in the frame and this is a conversation, and these are the players that they're going to be linked with. But without Champions League football, I find it hard that Leroy Sané is going to be linked to Newcastle.
For sure. And Joe Gomez is one who was linked to leave Liverpool a lot this summer for a bunch of different clubs. But he did not go. But he does seem out of favor with Arne Slot. Could we see Newcastle go for Joe Gomez this January, Pete, especially if they're going to go either for Mark Gahey or...
Yeah, again, we know Newcastle want to bring in a centre-back. They didn't manage to get a deal for Mark Gahey over the line. There was interest from Newcastle and Joe Gomez earlier in the summer as part of a potential Anthony Gordon sort of swap deal, when Newcastle were maybe looking at doing a bit of wheeling and dealing before that PSR deadline at the end of June. That deal didn't materialise as well. I think Joe Gomez has got a big decision to make on his future really at Liverpool. He probably finds himself now as fourth choice centre back at the club now, behind Van Dijk, Konate and Kwanzaa, and I'm sure Joe Gomez at this stage of his career doesn't really see himself as being fourth choice. He was part of that England squad at the Euros, although he didn't feature. But if he's going to find himself fourth choice for Liverpool, he's not going to get into too many more England squads going forward. So I think the decision probably rests more with Joe Gomez and Liverpool right now. But I don't think Liverpool would entertain letting Joe Gomez go in January, especially if they didn't have a replacement lined up as well. So there's lots of connotations to be held over this one on what might happen with Joe Gomez's future. But I think the longer it drags on and he's not playing regular first team football, I think Joe Gomez himself might have to push for a move away from Liverpool to sort of kickstart his career again.
And Paul, Jonathan David is a player who has been linked with a move to the Premier League for as long as I can remember. His contract ends at the end of this year and is open to sign a pre-contract as soon as January. Newcastle obviously have Alexander Isak, but he always seems to be 1 foot out the door potentially with other big clubs circling. Would Jonathan David be a good replacement for Isak?
No, not necessarily a replacement for Isak. I think it'd be more Callum Wilson. I think Callum Wilson, he's 30 plus now, isn't he? He's getting heavily linked in the UK with many top Premier League clubs or mid-table Premier League clubs, let's say. And I think if Newcastle are to move either Isak or Wilson on, I think it would be the preference to move Callum Wilson on. Jonathan Davis, a good player, still only 24 years old, been at Lille, since 4 years now, Canadian international, top player, attacking, goal-minded, similar to Isak in the way that he plays. I certainly wouldn't be against him coming to that. I think it'd be a good sign for Newcastle if he did come, but I think they went into last season light. If you are going to let Callum Wilson go, if he is to leave, if it's a replacement, if we're talking about a replacement for either Isak or Wilson, I think you need another one. I think that's what they fell short of last year. I think they went into the Champions League. Callum Wilson doesn't generally stay fit for a whole season. Isak's one of the quick players. He's always prone to a hamstring injury. You can't rely on him for a whole season. I think they needed three top strikers, or three strikers that can play in that position. So I think if Wilson or Isak is to leave, yes, Jonathan Davis is a good option, but I think they need another one if they are to compete regularly at the top.
And Pete, Paul mentioned Callum Wilson. There are rumours that he'll leave in January. Fulham and Brentford are both circling. Would Newcastle be willing to let him go without a replacement?
They wouldn't let him go without a replacement, no doubts about that. Like Paul's mentioned there, I think they're pretty short in attack as well. obviously the problem with Callum Wilson is he's a regular goal scorer, but he also regularly picks up injuries, and that's always been the downside for Callum Wilson, that he does pick up a lot of knocks and he does miss a lot of games. But when he is fit, he is one of the best strikers in the Premier League. His goal ratio is right up there, and that's why he's been such a good signing for Newcastle over the last couple of seasons. The thing for Newcastle right now is he's out of contract come next summer, so the January transfer window probably does offer them the last chance to cash in on Callum Wilson. They considered selling him in the summer. There was talk of interest from Saudi Arabia plus other Premier League clubs in Callum Wilson, but then he picked up an injury which forced him to miss the start of the season, so no one was going to buy him while he was injured. But yeah, I think if he gets back to fitness, starts scoring a few goals for Newcastle, I'm sure there will be clubs looking at Callum Wilson ready to offer him a long-term contract, because he does turn 33 in February, so this is probably his last chance to sort of get a big move to maybe another Premier League club. There's been talk of interest from Fulham and Brentford, and both of those clubs do need forward reinforcements in January, so that would make a lot of sense for me if it was to happen. But I don't think Newcastle would be advised to let Callum Wilson go without having the replacement lined up either, so they are short of options in attack as it is, so to lose Wilson without a replacement would just place even more burden and pressure on Alexander Isak to lead that line. So yeah, if Newcastle can find a replacement, I think they would be open to maybe letting Callum Wilson leave.